Hey guys, Dr. Jamie. I don't know if you guys know this, but almost 75% of Americans are dehydrated. You all know I'm a huge fan of electrolyte supplementation, and most Americans are drinking less than 44 ounces of water per day. Well, one thing that might be able to help you get rehydrated and drink more water is by the use of electrolytes. And I want to introduce you to the Vitamin IQ new electrolyte mix. This is the crucial aspect of your wellness. It is intelligent hydration. Not only does it have 3 times the electrolytes of any sports drink, but it also has a cellular energy blend of D-ribose, taurine, creatine, and NAD precursors. It comes in a delicious orange flavor that my kids love. So if you're looking for a new electrolyte supplement, go check out Vitamin IQ on Amazon or vitaminiq.com. Welcome to the Fit and Fabulous podcast with Dr. Jamie Seaman. Hello, everybody. It's Dr. Jamie, and welcome back to the Fit and Fabulous podcast. I am so excited. I know I probably say this every time. I'm so excited about today's guest. But I have been trying to get Casey Mean on the podcast. She has a new book coming out that we're going to talk about. But you guys are going to absolutely love today's podcast. I love everything this woman stands for, and hopefully you take home some tidbits and nuggets with you. So let me introduce you, Dr. Casey Mean. She is a medical doctor. She is Stanford trained, and she's the co-founder of Levels. If you guys haven't seen that out there on the Instagram and the socials, go check it out. It's a health technology company with a mission of reversing the world's metabolic health crisis. Her book on metabolic health, which is called Good Energy, comes out in May of 2024. So you guys are listening to this. It's dropping very soon with Penguin Random House. She received her Bachelor of Arts with honors and her MD from Stanford. She was president of her class. Okay. She served on the faculty there. She trained in head and neck surgery, which I totally want to talk about because I'm a gynecologist, you guys. But she left traditional medicine to devote her life to tackling the root cause of why Americans are sick. She's been featured in New York Times, The New Yorker, The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Women's Health, and so much more. I found her on Instagram, and she is fantastic. Casey Means, welcome to the Fit and Fabulous podcast.
Dr. Jamie, thank you so much for having me. I also found you on Instagram, and there's almost nothing more fun than meeting your Instagram friends in sort of real life like this. This is so exciting. So I'm thrilled to be here.
I think the algorithm just knew what it was doing.
Helping us find our people. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to dive right into your story. You have this new book coming out called Good Energy, and I was able to look through it, and you dedicated this book to your mother. And so I want to go right into that story and tell us about your mom, Gail, because I generally start these podcasts asking people, there's always like some life event that drives us into our passion, whether we know it or not. And I suspect this story is just that for you.
Yeah, thank you for asking it. I think sharing a little bit about my mother really just brings all the pieces together of essentially my whole life. And I think that the story a lot of people will probably see themselves in this story, or someone in their family, or something that they're witnessing in the healthcare space. So my mom, I'll start when she was 40. So she had me when she was 40, and she had been pretty healthy throughout her life. She was living in New York from like her 20s to when she was 40, and had a fabulous life in the fashion industry. Had me a little bit later in life. She was 40. She gained about 75 pounds during pregnancy. I was born almost 12 pounds, and she was congratulated.
I saw that. That's big.
Big baby. I was 11 pounds, 9 ounces. And, everyone's like, oh, you've got this big, healthy baby. This is amazing. Had to have a C-section because I was so large. And then, her 40s went on. She had a ton of trouble losing the baby weight. And so that was sort of the time when she went from being healthy weight pre-pregnancy to being overweight post-pregnancy. Late 40s, she went through menopause. She had a really tough menopause. I remember it vividly. She was sweating all the time. She was, had the mood and the sleep issues and all that. Doctors said, oh, I know menopause is so tough. There's not much we can do for you. She gets into her 50s. Her blood pressure starts going up. They give her an ACE inhibitor. Her cholesterol starts going up. They give her a statin, a prescription that's prescribed over 200 million times in the US every year. Of course, they tell her like, this is super common for your age. And, we've got the statin, we've got the ACE inhibitor, you're good. Gets into her 60s, blood sugar starts going up. They tell her she has prediabetes. They give her a prescription for metformin. Again, very common. It's a pre-disease. This is, a prescription they give out over 90 million times in the US every year. So now she's in about her early 70s, and she's taking all her medications and, checking all the boxes, and she's 72, and she was taking a walk with my dad. They were hiking. They hiked every night in Northern California on the coast near their home. And she had a very sharp pain in her belly, and it lasted for a few days, and it was pretty bad. So her primary care doctor ordered a CT scan for her. And later that day, she got a text message to her phone with the results of her CT scan, which said stage 4 widely metastatic pancreatic cancer. And 13 days later, she was dead. And this was about 3 years ago. So at the time of her passing at 72, the doctors, sat with us and said, oh my gosh, this is so unlucky. This is so unlucky that your mom got cancer and that she's, declining so rapidly. And I think certainly from our conventional Western traditional medical framework, it probably did seem kind of random. She's 72, she gets cancer. What a bad card. But I think when you step back and you really start looking at root causes, and a framework that I don't think we're really taught in conventional medicine, to look at like, what are the connections between all the symptoms, all the diseases that my mom had, and really look down at that cellular root cause level, it becomes super clear very fast that actually the cancer was totally predictable. And every step along my mom's journey was a increasingly louder warning sign of essentially the same process happening and just getting worse and worse and worse, starting all the way back when she was 40, when she gained a ton of weight in pregnancy, had a 12-pound baby, which is, I speaking to the OBGYN, but like fetal macrosomia. She had a baby who was literally fetal macrosomia, is big-bodied baby, which is a clear sign that both the baby and the mother might be going on to develop metabolic issues, puts both at higher risk. And then moving into the, extreme menopausal symptoms, the high cholesterol, the high glucose, the high blood pressure, pretty much the definition of metabolic syndrome. And then ultimately the cancer that we now know more and more is driven in large part by hyperinsulinemia and metabolic dysfunction. So through that framework, it actually is just a really clear sequence of steps. But unfortunately, because of the way our system is structured and the blind spots that we have in our very silo-based, reactive, subspecialized healthcare system, the pieces are all really held apart for patients, and we really don't guide people in seeing the connections and how to actually fix the core problem, which is the metabolic dysfunction, which is what I call in the book bad energy. And I would just say briefly, I think the way this ties together with my own personal story as a doctor is that I trained as a head and neck surgeon, and at the end of medical school, you basically have to pick one of like 40 plus medical subspecialties. And so this siloing and this seeing things as different is so present in that, even in that choice of what you're going to go into. It's so much about these end state manifestations of disease rather than sort of core physiology. You can't go into residency for metabolic dysfunction. You go in for a specific field. And I remember when I was finishing up my residency, like the unofficial motto for people going into private practice was like, you eat what you kill. Like you are literally, it's this like really yucky euphemism that basically means like you are going to essentially, your livelihood is dependent on how many surgeries you book. And I share that just because I think the intervention based, wait till disease arises and then essentially intervene on it, and that's how we make money. That core financial incentive of our Western healthcare system is so much of what's driving us, I think, in the healthcare system to have this blind spot of connections, because the system is economically predicated on hyper specialization and intervention. And so fundamentally, this book, Good Energy, is about a reimagination of the healthcare system and about the way we look at the body to really understand it as a unified entity with actually very well-established core physiological disturbances that are leading to most of our problems. And if we can shift the $4 trillion arrow of healthcare towards the right problem, which is really the center of the cell, it's going to be so much simpler for us to radically improve the health and prosperity of our population. And I think the real big lie that the healthcare system does not want us to realize, and the trillions of dollars behind it, is that it's actually quite straightforward and simple to create good energy in the body, to create metabolic health. And it's in the control of every single person through basic daily choices that you can manage for yourself.
Yeah. Could not agree with everything you've said thus far. And a lot to unpack there, but where I really want to kind of ping off what you just said is this idea of subspecialties. Just for people's like frame of reference, I took a different pathway than Dr. Casey Means did. So I did obstetrics and gynecology. I have done a fellowship in integrative medicine, but that's not part of obstetrics and gynecology. People could go on from my specialty to specialize in GYN oncology or maternal fetal medicine, which is high risk, or reproductive endocrinology, which is like doctors that do IVF. And then even within those subspecialties, people can have specialties. And I think in your book, like there was some example of like a guy who, I don't know, takes care of the small bones in the inner ear or something along those lines. But literally we've gotten so far down in the weeds of like this tiny little minute part of the body. And just sometimes we need to go all the way back and just say, all of these things are connected, right? And the difficult part, I think, in medicine is that I do think that most doctors go into medicine because they really want to help people. Like I don't want people listening right now to be like, oh my gosh, these two doctors are just like bashing I work in the medical system, you guys. I have not left traditional medicine. I'm boots on the ground. I see patients in clinic all day. But the way that it is structured, it's very algorithm-based medicine. It's like identify disease process and here's the treatment. And the treatment may be a medication or it may be a surgery. And you and I work in surgical specialties. So sometimes surgery is definitely warranted. But the business of medicine is that we get paid by how many patients we see, how many procedures we do. We actually don't get money from prescriptions. I think people think we get some like $5 gift card that comes into our box for every prescription we write. But then I want to think about, then who's profiting? If the doctors are really just trying to do the best thing that they know how to do and how they were trained, because I really do think most doctors do, then who's profiting off of all of this? And I know you and your brother loved you both have probably an opinion, but I mean, when I think about it like that, it's like, and you said in your book, right, there's money in sick care, not in healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, I think the stark economic reality, which you just alluded to, but the stark economic reality that people need to realize, not to be afraid, but to be eyes wide open about the system that we're putting so much of our faith into, is that essentially every institution related to health, every institution that touches the health of the American population makes more money when we are sick and it makes less money when we are healthy. Like that's just the reality. And that goes for hospitals to doctors' offices to insurance companies even. And it's perplexing. And there's been movements towards things like value-based care, which is like essentially paying for better outcomes for a lower cost. So doctors would be reimbursed more for value-based care. And I'd be super curious to hear your thoughts on this still being in the system. But Affordable Care Act tried to bring forward value-based care. And what I found so interesting about how that almost got like co-opted by financial interests was that you'd think that we would define value in healthcare as a patient who's getting better. And I define a patient who's getting better as a patient whose cells are functioning better. So actual better function within the 40 plus trillion cells of that patient's body, because when cells are functioning properly, the symptoms of diseases go away. And instead, the way value was defined was things like medication adherence. So you would look at like what a doctor who's getting reimbursed for asthma treatment would be getting extra reimbursement for providing value-based care. And you would think the value would be a patient whose asthma got better. But the value criteria was actually how many patients in that doctor's panel with a diagnosis of asthma were on long-term like albuterol therapy, basically. So adherence to a medication was defined as a good outcome rather than actual cellular improved function. So I think that's
I get letters all the time from insurance companies saying, your patient so and so hasn't filled her prescription for XYZ. You know, we wanted to let you know. Can you let us know? Is she not coming to see you anymore? Is she not compliant? Did she, cure her disease or whatever? I mean, these insurance companies are like Blackhawks. And the other thing they do is they'll send me letters and say, we noticed your patient has diabetes and they're not on a statin.
Yes.
That's standard of care. They'll send letters like, that's standard of care. Like, why aren't you doing this? Oh my
That's
gosh.
right.
It drives me crazy that you have to justify yourself to insurance companies. And like, don't even start me on prior authorizations and the peer-to-peers that I have to do to really actually advocate for patient care. But the one thing I wanted to say about this whole, what'd you call it, value-based care or whatever, is I talked about this system that we've created where you have a problem and then here's your solution. It's either a pill or a surgery or whatever it is. The problem is the patients like it. The vast majority of them want a pill or they want a surgery because it takes away the personal accountability when it comes to chronic disease to say like, oh, it's just my thyroid, or like, oh, it was just my gallbladder. We'll just take, right? Which these things are metabolic diseases. I think sometimes our system almost, patty cakes patients in that way when it comes to chronic diseases. And I read in your book, you said the medical system is good for acute care and not chronic care. And as an example to people listening, what she means by that is, oh my gosh, if you get this random infection in your face and you need antibiotics, or if you get in a car accident and you snap your femur in half, or, whatever it is, and there are certain cancers even that are not related to metabolic disease and that they do happen by random chance. Thank God for Western medicine. Thank God we have these brilliant scientists and doctors that are, that we don't die of dysentery and things that we died from, on the Oregon Trail. But when it comes to chronic diseases, I agree with you. We're not saving anybody. So let's dive into this idea. What is good energy and what is bad energy? You keep talking about the level of the cell. So tell people what causes metabolic disease.
Yeah. So good energy is the simple framework that I'm presenting to represent metabolic function. So metabolism, and I'm sure your audience is familiar with this because I know you are also a metabolic warrior, but metabolism is how we simply produce cellular energy from food energy. There's this potential energy that comes into our body. 70 metric tons of it go into our body in our lifetime. And the really core, absolutely foundational job of our bodies in every single cell is to convert that potential energy from food, aka the environment, the cosmos, through our cells into a currency of energy that we can use as our life force to power, to pay for every single one of the trillions of chemical reactions happening every second in our body. And this experience of self and life and consciousness, everything that we're sort of experiencing as the whole self, is fundamentally the bubbling up of all those trillions of chemical reactions happening every second, each of which requires energy to happen. So when there's a metabolic problem, what I call bad energy, it's essentially the block of the flow of food energy to cellular energy, resulting in underpowered cells. And each cell is like a little city. It's like a little machine that's doing its job all day long. If all the cells are doing their jobs properly, we have health. If they aren't, we have disease. And one of the key ways that our cells are essentially not functioning properly right now in the Western industrial modern world is that they are underpowered. Some research suggests that 93.2% of American adults have some element of a metabolic issue. And this is just astronomically higher than it was 50, 100 years ago. And what I share in the book is that part of the reason for this is because all these rapid changes in our environment, in the environment being essentially the stew in which these 40 trillion cells live and take and receive and give energy and materials from, it's so different. And you look at the food we're eating that's super industrial, covered in pesticides, filled with refined products made in a factory. You look at our sleep, we're getting 2 hours less sleep per night than we were 100 years ago. You look at movement, we're sitting for almost the entire day. We're You look at stress, we've got these devices in our hands that are just like literally streaming fear-inducing media into our eyeballs from 8 billion people 24 hours a day. We're indoors 93% of the time. We are bodies that are meant to be outside in the sunlight. We have over 80,000 environmental toxins in our food, water, air, personal care products. We're living this thermoneutral existence indoors at 72 degrees. We're not getting swings in temperature, which are an energetic signal to, we want those swings in temperature because they're a signal to ourselves. So at every level of modernity, we've got changes. And what I show in the book is that what all those changes are doing is actually funneling through the metabolic machinery to damage it. So in every way, sleep deprivation, chronic stress, industrialized food, neutral temperatures, environmental toxins, they all hit this beautiful, precious part of the cell, the mitochondria, in a different way. So you have this broken machine inside the body that is the ultimate transformer of food energy to human energy. And because they are synergistically screwing with this precious part inside our cells, we're essentially blocked in that flow of creating power in our bodies. And so you start to get dysfunction. And I think the key thing for people to realize is that, like, the reason this looks like so many diseases, people might be saying like, well, it seems like a big statement to say like this one thing is causing all these problems or contributing to all these problems. And when we look at the metabolic spectrum of disease, like we talked about with my mom, it can be everything from fetal macrosomia to inability to lose weight to menopausal symptoms, of course, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high cholesterol, but it can also be things like depression, anxiety, gout, migraine, chronic pain, infertility, PCOS, erectile dysfunction, retinopathy, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease, Alzheimer's dementia, cancer, stroke. Like each of those diseases we know is linked to underpowered cells, mitochondrial dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction. And this is the key point. We have 200 plus cell types in the body. I think it's around 221 cell types. We've got the liver cell, the astrocytes in the brain, the glial cells in the brain, the ovarian theca cells, the endothelial cells. We've got all these different types of cells doing different jobs in different parts of the body. All of them need energy to function. So underpowering in an ovarian theca cell is going to look different than underpowering in an astrocyte or underpowering in an endothelial cell of the penis or an endothelial cell in the capillaries of the retina. It's all going to look different. But the big fallacy of the Western healthcare system is that we actually think that they are different things. We silo them. And because we sort of named these diseases when we didn't understand the cellular physiology. So of course they seem different. Of course liver disease looked different than Alzheimer's disease because we didn't understand what was really going on inside the cell. Now we do. Now we understand that these symptoms and diseases are the downstream manifestation of often the exact same problem inside the cell. So we need to fix that problem, the bad energy. And the bad energy, the metabolic dysfunction, is fundamentally rooted in three processes that I talk about in the book, the trifecta of bad energy, which is mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, which is the body sort of responding to an underpowered cell and this cell that can't do its work. And so it revs up the immune system. And then what's called oxidative stress, which is basically excess damaging molecules in the body that also occur in the setting of mitochondrial dysfunction. So it's this trifecta of physiologic processes that I really think we could slash the suffering in our country and our healthcare costs by so much if we just really put a lot of our energy in our personal lives and our healthcare system towards ameliorating those phenomenon. And what I think would happen is that a lot of the symptoms and diseases that seem so disparate that so many people are facing would truly melt away because we're essentially allowing the life force of our cells to be stronger and to power better function throughout our whole bodies. So that's kind of the landscape of good and bad energy.
So I want to draw that like invisible string for people who have, kind of been thinking through your mom's story, because I know there's somebody sitting there thinking, okay, I get it. Broken mitochondria. How does that cause pancreatic cancer? So, you just listed off kind of the framework here for this bad energy, which is mitochondrial dysfunction. Okay. So we can all agree with that. We've just done a lot of stress to our bodies and that little powerhouse isn't doing what it's supposed to do. Okay. So now we have an energy deficit. Now we're sending out a warning signal, inflammation. We're activating the immune system. We don't know what's going on. Our energy stores are bad. We can't make more. Now it's oxidative stress, which is essentially, I could use all sorts of analogies like rusting from the inside. But essentially, when we think about something like pancreatic cancer, is our body is constantly turning over its cells. I mean, we literally regrow some of our organs, like our gut lining every couple days. We regrow the entire gut lining, right? We rebuild our liver like, every, I don't know what it is, 10 years.
Our skin.
So the pancreas, right? Yeah. It's going to have cells that are turning over. And when you've done enough damage to the mitochondria, you've created enough inflammation, you've created enough oxidative stress, sometimes it's just too much and you hit that tipping point. And once a cancer cell starts, cancer hijacks the whole system. So it says, okay, you don't have energy, I'll find energy, right? And glucose is one of the most available energies, and most cancers love glucose. And they can grow really rapidly, and they bypass all the normal stops. And another analogy I like to use is when we don't see a lot of kids with cancer, right? We see, some childhood leukemia and things like that, brain tumors, but kids aren't dying of pancreatic cancer. So when we're young, we have this really large bucket, like the Home Depot 5-gallon bucket, right? And we can throw all sorts of stressors in there. Like we're eating Taco Bell, we're drinking beer, we're not exercising. We got a big bucket, and nothing bad is going to happen until that bucket overflows. Now, unfortunately, today's children are filling their 5-gallon bucket really quickly because we have a lot of problems with our food system and all the things you've mentioned. But as we get older, that bucket just naturally gets smaller. We just become less resilient as we get older through the aging process. Your mom went through menopause. Now we don't have estrogen. Now she doesn't have as much growth hormone. She's losing her muscle mass. So this bucket's getting smaller. And if you haven't fixed these problems, these warning signs that she had since age 40, the bucket starts spilling over, and it's bound to end with something that will eventually take your life. So I want people to kind of start to we just use this word like metabolic disease, but I really want people to understand, because I really think the solution is patients becoming accountable to like their own health.
Yeah.
It's just, it's really scary.
It is. I mean, I think that was such a beautiful way of unpacking it even further. And I think to even drive it home, just keep pushing that because I think really when people like truly like grok this, like really get it becomes so clear. And excuse me. So if you've got this mitochondria that's essentially broken from both the food, but also all those other lifestyles that we talked about, like synergistically hurting it, it's basically a little powerhouse that just cannot do the throughput of its work, the food energy, which is going to bubble down into like glucose and fatty acids and turn it to that cellular energy, ATP. So the cell is so smart, it's going to say like, I can't process all this because my powerhouse, my converter is broken. And so the cell protects itself by basically blocking the entry of more of those food substrates into the body, into the cell. So that is fundamentally insulin resistance, a key part of this metabolic spectrum, where the cell is saying, I'm overburdened and dysfunctional. I cannot take in more, because then it's just going to crowd the cell with stuff I can't really process. So the body creates this process of insulin resistance because insulin is the hormone that helps glucose get into the cell. So if it can block it, that's less glucose getting into the cell. So then we get two things happening. One is that the body's like, well, we got to get this glucose into the cell. So it raises the insulin levels in the body to try and drive the glucose into the cell. And a lot of that glucose needs to go somewhere. So it's going to convert to a storage form, which is fat. So this is why we often see rising glucose levels in the blood with rising insulin levels, with rising triglyceride levels. And the way that relates back to the cancer is that you've got this excess glucose that can essentially feed cancer cells, but B, you've got high insulin levels, which is an anabolic hormone. It's a hormone in the body that says lots of food energy
growth
around, growth promoting. And so on every level, you've got the insulin that's going to say, we've got all, because insulin is essentially a signal saying there's lots of glucose around, we need to do something with it. And so anabolic, so it can drive cancer, so more growth. It can drive increased baby size, so the fetal macrosomia, and from my understanding, and you would know better than I, that the insulin actually doesn't cross the the placenta, I believe, but the glucose,
Right.
a high glucose
The
in the
glucose
mother's blood
does.
does, and that
Yeah.
actually creates insulin resistance in the baby. So the baby's potentially becoming
Well, so the
hyperinsulinemic.
fetal pancreas will, yeah, I mean, early on in a pregnancy, the fetus doesn't really have a functioning pancreas. So hyperglycemia can cause birth defects as the cells are rapidly dividing. That's why diabetics have more congenital heart defects, spina bifida. They can get micropenis, lots of different problems that can happen with the baby. But as the baby grows and develops, and that glucose is being shuttled across the fetal placental interface, now that baby has to make its own insulin. So that pancreas, the baby's becoming hyperinsulinemic. And then when the baby's born, this almost 12-pound baby, Casey, right? We just picture you all cute and squishy, but the umbilical cord gets cut. And now that baby's on its own. So now it has hyperinsulinemia and it has to figure out how to eat and eat quickly, or these babies are at severe risk of NICU admission for hypoglycemia. Any baby born over a certain number of grams in our newborn nursery gets heel sticks for glucose levels, because these babies are at high risk of having low blood sugars and electrolyte abnormalities and getting a NICU admission for that problem. And then it's not just an issue of the delivery itself, but we know through the HAPO trial and the HAPO follow-up trials, which is the hyperglycemia adverse outcome pregnancy outcome trials. It's a linear relationship between how much glucose and insulin exposure there is to the pregnancy and lifetime risk of metabolic disease, diabetes, heart disease. So there's this fetal programming that happens in utero through this exposure that literally can turn on light switches on and off on your baby's DNA. So, I mean, this is a huge issue when we think about how bad insulin resistance and metabolic disease is. And it's one of the reasons I become very passionate in my field, because if I can change a young woman's metabolic disease, we're talking about like transgenerational impact. So that's why it's, really near and dear to my heart. And most people know my story, but I have 3 daughters and I ate like crap and I failed those glucose tests. My kids weren't 12 pounds. They were between 8 and 9, all of them. But now, oh my God, what did I do to their DNA? So, now I'm having to teach my girls, okay, this is how we eat. This is how we cook. This is why we do it. This is what's going to be good for our bodies. I don't want people to think that your genetics are your destiny. They're absolutely not. I actually came from a long family history of normal BMI diabetics. So it doesn't have to be that way. Your lifestyle has the greatest impact beyond anything, any medication. It's better than any medication. It's the best thing you can do is to focus on how to go from bad energy to good energy. So I want to dive in how to do that. So let's talk about nutrition, because that's one thing that we do every day, multiple times per day, I guess, unless you're fasting. But in your book, you talk about the 6 principles of good eating. Give us some little tips and tricks here.
Ooh, yes, absolutely. And I would just like to echo first, like your empowering message about how so much of this is reversible. I think it goes back to what you were saying about how we are constantly regenerating the body. Like, it's so neat that we literally, because we are a dynamic entity, the body is not one thing forever. And we're literally every single day 3D printing a new version of our body from food. The beauty of that is that the genetic code is there to basically express a healthy version of the body by and large. And if we give the body what it needs, we're just continually reprinting a healthier version of ourselves. So the fact that we are a dynamic body is part of the beauty of how we can continue to regenerate health, really, no matter where we're at. And I think that's just it's such a beautiful thing. So in terms of actually what to do, I think that one framework to think about is that, because ultimately what we're trying to do is improve the function, quantity, and throughput of the mitochondria, to allow that channeling of energy through it, release the insulin block, improve the overall metabolic functioning of the body. The way to think about all the lifestyle pillars is like, am I making a choice that's showing compassion and care for my mitochondria, or am I not? And then it's going through all the different lifestyle pillars that we know based on the research can affect the mitochondria, and taking honest stock of where there's decisions that are hurting or helping the mitochondria, and then just continually just working through the different lifestyle choices across food, sleep, exercise, stress, toxins, temperature, light, and making micro adjustments. Like that's in my mind, it's really as simple as that. And in the book, I have a lot of quizzes for people to take honest stock of what's happening. And it's not like you talked about with the bucket. It's not like doing all of it at once. It's like, how do we get the bucket down to a level where the body can handle the amount of load and stress that's on it, as opposed to tipping into dysfunction. So it's not about being perfect. It's about just like getting that bucket down to a level where this incredible machine of the body can handle it and be functional. So from a food standpoint, there's really, in looking at the research, there's 5 things that I think can be really, really helpful to put into most our meals, and 3 things that we just really want to take out that promote bad energy. And the 5 that I talk about in the book is that are components that we can really think about putting in most of our meals is an antioxidant source, a really healthy protein source, omega-3 fats, a probiotic source, and a fiber source. And I think really the way I think about cooking and food now is, how do I literally just mix and match from sources in each of those categories to just put meals together. So if it's breakfast, I'm thinking about, okay, I want my protein, so I'm going to get some grass-fed eggs and some chicken and put that together in a pan. For probiotics, put some sauerkraut or some Greek yogurt on top. For omega-3s, I've got the, omega-3 rich eggs. I could maybe throw some hemp seeds, on the side. For antioxidants, maybe on the side, I have a little bit of Greek yogurt with berries and blueberries or something like that. But basically just like thinking running through the checklist in my head for how to get a little bit of each of those things. For the 3 things that are just never going to help the mitochondria, and I call them the unholy trinity in the book, it's refined processed sugars, refined ultra processed grains, and refined industrial seed oils. They do nothing to help our health. We don't need them. And
every processed food.
Every processed food. Yeah. And something that motivates me is like, we only have a limited number of this material from the environment we can put into our bodies every day that's essentially going to define the structure and function of our lives. And so I don't want to waste any of that space of this precious material that's going to become me on these things that not only don't do anything to help the function or the structure, but they also cause problems. So it's like just crowding them out with all the real food. On top of that, because of our industrial agriculture system with the pesticides and the mechanical tilling and the no cover crops and all the ways that industrial farming has changed our soil, we have this depleted soil in America that actually then injects fewer nutrients into each bite that we actually do take. So we've got depleted food and only a certain amount we can essentially put into our bodies every day. So making every bite count with real unprocessed food, ideally from good soil, is one of the best things we can do to support the structure and the function of our cells. And something I talk about in the book is like, we need to really, I think, start moving past diet wars and like the strict dietary ideologies of like vegan or keto or carnivore or paleo, and really focus in on components and principles of eating, and focusing on getting the cells like the molecular information they need, which in the framework I present in the book can be achieved if you are crafting your meals around those things I talked about: protein, omega-3s, fiber, probiotics, antioxidants. And then on top of that, I also say in the book, like, do not take my word for it. Like, this is a framework that I'm putting forward that's based on first principles and cellular needs. But fundamentally, you should understand how your food and your dietary choices are affecting your body. And everyone has the power to do that through basic biomarkers or even more complex and advanced biomarkers. But if you are committing to a strategy and you are feeling incredible and your biomarkers are in a great range, like, that's great. Keep doing that. And I think we all know people who are eating diets like across the spectrum who are doing really well. But I think the commonality amongst all of those is they're eating real unprocessed food and whole foods. Yeah. And probably cooking most of their meals. And so that's a key foundation that I think everyone will benefit from. But also, don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it. understanding some of your own basic biomarkers is really key, because you can prove to yourself whether things are going well or not. And for people who think like, oh, this is hard or it's expensive, actually, I think if you just focus on the 5 key markers of metabolic syndrome, which is fasting glucose, triglycerides, HDL, waist circumference, and blood pressure, if those are close to or in the normal or optimal range, like that's a great sign that the food you're putting into your body is probably cultivating more of a good energy ecosystem. So those are some of the basic principles about diet that I talk about in the book. And then I think it's really critical to just always be testing even the very basic cheap biomarkers to understand if it's supporting good energy in the body.
Yeah, we're really seeing like, I want to talk about wearables. I do want to note you have a whole section in the book about labs and kind of what people should be looking for. These are the normal lab ranges, so you guys can check out Good Energy for that. But let's talk about these wearable devices. When I first started on my journey, I was pre-diabetic. I wasn't testing. I was just eating a low carb diet, paleo, Whole30, whatever it was. But eventually, I started wearing a CGM. Oh my gosh, I learned so much about myself because I would realize that when I would get a glucose spike as it was coming down, I would get anxiety. Yeah. And I thought it was postpartum anxiety, and it wasn't. It was my blood sugar like crashing back down. Oof. So I am a huge fan of these devices, but I'm interested to hear your take because, of course, amongst the, doctors of Instagram, there's some people that really think CGMs are dumb and that we're pathologizing glucose levels and freaking people out about these glucose spikes or whatever. So talk to us about wearable devices and especially like CGMs and glucose monitoring, because I know that's what Levels is all about.
Yeah. So I think in that conversation around whether we're pathologizing glucose levels, the reality is that the body is pathologizing glucose levels. We have 50% of American adults now have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. A full 50% of the country, probably many more than that, have insulin resistance that has not yet made it to the clinical range of diagnostic criteria. 30% of young people now have prediabetes, a condition that a pediatrician may have never seen in their lifetime. The first case report of pediatric non-alcoholic fatty liver disease was in 1984, and now it's 24% of young adults. So in the face of those trends that literally may both bankrupt our country and be the thing that ultimately is sort of the nail in the coffin for the American experiment, like I'm a believer in giving people information to understand that biomarker, because it's literally mostly preventable to have a blood sugar issue. And right now people are flying blind on an issue that's essentially decimating the human capital and our children in the country. So in the face of the monumental uphill battle of two systems that do not profit off our health, which is the processed food industry and the healthcare industry, which together are about $10 trillion of economic interest, I'm a believer in people having some information to basically stand in the face of that. So glucose monitoring is a type of wearable. It's the first biosensor that's ever existed. So a wearable like you'd wear on your wrist is obviously looking with light through the skin at what's going on inside the body. But a bio wearable is a sensor that actually has a little probe that goes under the skin to measure an internal biomarker, like essentially a lab test, automatically every 5 to 15 minutes, 24 hours a day, sends that information to your smartphone. So the benefit of this is that as you are eating foods, you can immediately see the relative impact that that's having on your blood sugar levels. And things can be so sneaky. Like now we have high fructose corn syrup in most ketchups in the market. And so you might think, oh, it's ketchup, it's tomatoes. But when you actually see, wow, that's causing a really big blood sugar spike compared to an unsweetened ketchup or a tomato, that's powerful information that can help you make a different choice. You may have been told by some nutrition influencer that XYZ is a super healthy breakfast, and you're eating that all the time because you believe that. But for your physiology and your level of insulin sensitivity, it's actually causing a very, very high glucose spike into a range that we actually know can contribute to inflammation and endothelial dysfunction and huge insulin spikes and lead to a big crash, which makes you feel, like you said, Dr. Jamie, like anxious, or potentially even have more cravings. We know that big crashes after big spikes can actually lead people to crave carbohydrates. So it's that type of individualized bio-individual feedback about our diet in the face of a culture that is designed to be confusing about food. Because the more confused we are about food, the more we try all these different strategies and everyone makes more money. It just cuts through the noise and tells you what's working for your body and what's not. And yeah, the idea is not to necessarily ever have a glucose spike, because obviously if we eat foods with carbohydrates, we're going to have a glucose rise. It's about understanding the relative impact between different strategies and different types of food within categories to have a lower and healthier, more metabolic impact. So I'm a huge fan of it for short periods of time to basically just have an insight into your body that you can take with you. I rarely wear continuous glucose monitors anymore because I'm pretty tuned in now about ways of combining foods to keep my glucose more stable, which food within certain categories like root vegetables or fruit are going to have like a lower impact for me, not because I'm afraid of a glucose spike, but because even in the short term, the foods that spike me higher are going to make me crash. That's unavoidable. And that makes me feel bad. That makes me less productive that day. That makes me less happy that day. So both in the short term and the long term, it's really just about like having awareness and moving towards I would say freedom from having to just constantly question and second guess yourself. So I think they're great tools for 2 weeks, for a month. Some people wear them for a year on their weight loss journey, but in the face of the monumental uphill battle that we are facing as Americans in the modern industrial food system, I think it's one more form of power that can help us fight the near inevitable metabolic disease that we're going to develop if we're not really vigilant about our health these days in America.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love the wearable devices. I can certainly see sometimes patients go over the top with them, you know, like with the data, you know, what do you do with the data? How do you interpret the data? Because now we've got sleep devices and Oura rings and all the things that people can wear. But I think that there is kind of a hunger out there from some patients to have that information and that biofeedback. And it just highlights how individual we are, because that's, you know, one thing I did when I put my CGM is I started playing around. I was like, okay, what happens when I eat ice cream? What happens when I eat pizza? Oh my gosh. It's just the greatest visual sometimes for patients to see that. Sean O'Mara, great doctor. His whole thing is visceral fat. I was just talking to him yesterday about a patient and who paid cash for an MRI because she wanted to see her visceral fat. Well, they have these calculators and it can give you a volumetric measurement of someone's visceral fat. But if I sit in front of this patient and I tell her she has 3 liters of visceral fat versus me pulling up this picture and showing her visceral fat, that visual is so powerful. And so that's what I love about the wearables is people can just see it right in front of their face in real time. And like I said, I personally think that the solution to the healthcare crisis in America is somehow making people personally accountable for their health, for their healthcare dollars. When people see that, it's really, I've seen it be just like the greatest little accountability partner for people.
Yeah.
Because even though they know it's going to happen, it's like when they see it, it does something different to them when it comes to behavior change. That's just been my anecdotal evidence for wearable devices in the clinic setting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like I said, I'm not wearing one. I'm actually wearing no wearables right now. I'm like in the wearable space, but I do take breaks from them because there's also the element of body awareness that I think is also so important for us to cultivate. I think one of the most damaging things about the conventional healthcare system is the way that we've been. What's that?
Just intuition.
Oh, intuition. Yeah.
Like we just touching in with our bodies. Like they're so smart and so resilient and
they're so smart and so resilient. And I think some of the messaging, even like the phrases like trust the science, like, yes, science is great. And I'm on PubMed every day, but there's also an element of like, trust yourself. Like there is I do believe there is like an agenda that is to essentially ask people to divorce themselves from like common sense, from body awareness. We are constantly our attention is being profited off of with this distraction industrial complex of the computers and the phones and the busyness and this drive towards just like constant motion and productivity, that it's almost like the messaging of like, trust things outside of yourself only, trust the science, trust exactly what these institutions say, these institutions of trust, and keep us so busy that we can barely even like hear what our bodies are saying, that it's creating this culture of like essentially subliminally telling people that like their body doesn't have the answers, when in fact, when we really slow down and get back to that sense of like listening to the clues our bodies are saying, I think what we find is that the body's like relentlessly giving us information about how it's functioning and what it needs. And if we choose to stop and listen, we can actually get tons of signals that you certainly don't need a bio wearable for. I think so. I think one of the reasons, like, I think one of the ways that we're going to help move ourselves out of this crisis is one, like re-empower people to realize that like symptoms are a gift. Symptoms are your body's clear way of screaming out for help, saying they are not getting what they need. And through our choices, we can make adjustments to hopefully get the body what it needs so that the symptom will subside. And again, this goes back to taking honest stock of the environment that your cells are living in across food, sleep, exercise, stress, toxins, light, temperature, and saying like, which areas could I be giving my body something different to help essentially alleviate this like suffering that it's expressing through symptoms. And so one is just like body awareness and really viewing symptoms as a gift and having a re-engendering of confidence in the wisdom within that does require actually setting boundaries in our life to slow down and say no to the constant movement so that we can literally hear the deafening wisdom from the body within us that I think in Western culture we have so lost. And I think part of the root cause of that is actually something that I feel like I've witnessed in the healthcare system, which is almost like we prey on the fear of patients. Like we are so afraid of we're afraid of death. We're afraid of sickness. We're afraid of all this stuff. And so with that, you can essentially say to patients, you can say like, oh, well, we have a solution for you. We have this solution, which is the drug or the surgery or whatever it is. And almost preying on our existential anxiety about whatever to search for solutions outside of yourself, whether it's the coping mechanisms through the constant dopamine, sources, the TV, the Netflix, whatever, or the drugs and the surgery. And so I think to me, and I talk about this in the book in the last chapter, which is called Fearlessness, the highest level of good energy. I really do think like a personal journey of curiosity, of thinking through some of these existential questions in life, like life and death, and really like getting back to basics about concepts of like spirituality and mortality. It's actually the foundation of health, I believe, and forging trusting in-person relationships that really soothe our nervous system and help us feel stronger. Because from that place of more security on like the deepest level, the existential, the spiritual level, we are less able to be blown by the wind of all these forces outside of us that tell us they have the answers. And we start to realize that actually we are miraculous, limitless, incredible beings who are basically a statistical impossibility to even be here. And just like this incredible spark of the universe. And like, actually, there's so much inside of us that's telling us the right answer, but we need to reinvigorate, I think, our confidence on that deepest level to know that we actually have a lot of the answers inside of us. Yes, the wearables and the lab testing are very important too, but fundamentally, if we really slow down and look within, I think we can really often know like how we're doing and what we might actually need to feel limitless and feel our absolute best. So
I love that. I love that. It's like sometimes we can get down into the weeds of talking about health and metabolic disease. And, sometimes you have to really think about like life and your purpose and like that introspection. And I think sometimes when you start going down those pathways of checking in with yourself, answers do sometimes reveal themselves. So
yeah.
I love that. I love that, Casey. So tell people when it drops, where they can find Good Energy.
Good Energy is where all books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores, my website, caseymeans.com/good energy. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all the things at Dr. Casey's Kitchen, Dr. Casey's Kitchen. And I have a newsletter that comes out every Monday with lots of information from the technical to the spiritual, and where I put some of my things that I'm ruminating about and deepest thoughts. And I hope this book is really helpful for everyone who reads it, and hopefully really inspires people to, like you said, take ownership of their health, but in a really positive and empowering way.
Yeah. Do you ever miss head and neck? Do you ever miss patients going back?
Ooh, that's a great, I would say that I don't miss it at all. And I think that this actually goes back a little bit to what I was just saying about trusting your internal wisdom. I think when I really started slowing down and started really listening to the cues of where I was energetically being pulled and what was really making me feel elevated and full and expansive in my body, in my mind, in my life, creating more peace for me, I've just been following that, for the past 6-7 years since I left the surgical world. And fundamentally, like, it's led me to where I am, which is, what really I think lights me up is science, integrating science, talking about science, and writing and connecting with people in a way that is not necessarily, like one-to-one in a patient interaction, but and so everyone's different. Every single person's different, but I think the more we can just like settle in and sort of feel like what's happening. Like, if there's anything I've learned, I feel like in the past 10 years, it's like trust more my body than my mind, and just keep following that pull of what's really drawing you. Because I think just like metabolism is the flow of the cosmos through our bodies into energy that fuels our consciousness. Also, like, we want to flow into like what I think like is what we're being drawn toward and pulled towards in our lives. And it's when we put up those blocks, like you've got signals saying, hey, you should probably do this with your life, but you're like, no, I think I should do this. That's when I think we're unhappy. And so, so just like always tuning into those signals. And that's what led me away from, I think, patient care. It wasn't really working for my mind and body, and more into this like education space. So yeah, but I see you online and I'm like,
no wrong answers.
You really like seem like you thrive on seeing patients, and I think it's so beautiful to watch you. And
I do. I mean, I've had a lot of opportunities presented to me in the last number of years to leave clinical medicine, and the answer is like very clear in my heart. I love what I do. I love being a surgeon. I love delivering babies. I love being part of a day that gets celebrated every single year for 100 years. It's just, I'm like literally tearing up just saying it. I mean, and so, as long as that continues to like pulse within me, because I'm sure my patients are listening. They're like, dear God, don't you leave us. Yeah. But there will be a day, I think there is in everybody's career, where, you pivot and reinvent and you follow your passion and you follow your heart. And it's beautiful, is what I'm saying, to see you follow this path. And I think that your reach is going to be far higher than seeing 15 patients a day in clinic, Casey. So thank you for listening to your heart, and thank you for writing Good Energy and sharing it with the world. I know it's going to be massively successful. So for everybody listening, go check out Good Energy, go find it, go follow Dr. Casey Means on Instagram. You guys, these are, I say this all the time on the podcast. We on social media, us doctors, rely on you guys to spread these messages around the world for us. So talk to your friends and family. There's somebody that is going to want to hear about this. So we appreciate you coming on the podcast, Casey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jamie.
Did you guys love that last episode of the Fit and Fabulous podcast? Well, of course you did. And I want to keep bringing you the most amazing content from the most incredible people. And you can help me by subscribing to the Dr. Fit and Fabulous channel. You guys know where the button is. Just click it. It's the doctor's orders.